Notice Lofgren also said, he very, very well put too, he mentioned that the constitutional government is paralyzed, right? Both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue. People are disgusted, confused with the way government is behaving. The popularity of Congress is somewhere around 9%, right, in single digits. People don't believe Congress is going to be effective in anything in solving their problems, and yet they vote for their congressman over and over again. It's not my congressman, right? Someone else's congressman. All right. So the dysfunction of constitutional government, the evident dysfunction of constitutional government, aids in the agenda of the deep state. Okay. So these are some overall perspectives I'm giving you that Lofgren really did not either touch upon or emphasize sufficiently. All right. And of course, he didn't talk at all about what we can do about it. And he also said they avoid social issues. Remember him saying that? They avoid social issues. So I asked the question, but what about the vast social injustices, not just inequality, but injustices that are abroad and present in our country today? And for example, how many of you have heard of Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow? Yes? Came out in 2010. I just read it. I've seen her speak and photographed her. Very impressed with what she had to say. And then reading the book, it's very informative about the way racial injustice is practiced today in a colorblind society. And I have to ask the question, well, wait a second, if the deep state really is in charge of everything, if things happen only with its assent, what's the relationship between this huge injustice perpetrated on poor members of minorities, most notably black people, but also Hispanics in this country, in the deep state? Well, I'm going to address that. We're going to take a look at that. So anyway, let's go to my PowerPoint. Do you have that up?
Laurie's handling that for you.
Okay, so that should be ready to go. Oh, but what I'd like to start with, am I casting a shadow? I'm going to stand at the side here. What I'd like to start with is my surprise, and perhaps your surprise too, that the deep state was brought into public awareness by none other than Donald Trump. That's right. All right, that strong leftist supporter of democratic values, right? So the deep state, thank you, the deep state became a public meme from the right. And he was quoting Breitbart News. And in fact, if you go to Breitbart News and you do a search on the deep state, you'll get a whole list of articles going back to December on the deep state. What is this all about? And boy, is this confusing, okay? So here's Trump accusing the deep state of being against him. And he's saying, oh, these unelected bureaucrats really had it in for me. Right? So then the New York Times had to assure everyone that the deep state, if it exists, is entirely benign. And I was so impressed by this, I cut out both articles in which they actually talk about it. Deep state. Yeah, echoes of deep state as a culture. So what the Times says in these two articles basically is that, oh, if there is a deep state, it's these career bureaucrats working for the CIA to keep us safe. Full stop.
Yeah.
Well, then it might be a good idea to look at some of the history of the New York Times' relationship with the CIA. And it goes back to the 50s. If you read David Talbot's book on Allen Dulles, which is on that bibliography, I want you to hold the bibliography. I'm going to be referring to works on the bibliography. Okay, the Devil's Chessboard, Allen Dulles, the CIA. so he was very, very tight with Arthur Hay Sulzberger, who was the publisher of the Times at that time. I mean, they were great buddies. I mean, Dulles was a very smooth operator. He traveled in high social circles. He had come from a very prestigious law firm, Wall Street law firm. Harriman. What is it?
The Harriman brothers.
Yeah, Harriman. Yeah.
Same as Preston.
Brown Brothers.
What's that?
Brown Brother Harriman.
Yes, Brown Brothers Harriman. Thank you very much. And incidentally, Brown Brothers Harriman occupies today a very large black marble building that overlooks the site of Occupy Wall Street. Speaking of ironic juxtapositions. All right. So he came out of Brown Brothers Harriman, which is a law firm that was used by very, very large corporations. And so the CIA very quickly became an agent for the profits and prosperity of large corporations. Right? And Sulzberger was very buddy-buddy with Dulles, who was very popular in these social circles, and a very nefarious character, as his daughter finally acknowledged. All right, do we have the first slide up? Okay, so this is Lofgren. Just to summarize, what are the agencies that participate in the deep state? Okay, the Department of Defense, the State Department, the CIA, the National Security Agency. And incidentally, the CIA has grown hugely and now outweighs the National Security Agency in terms of the money it gets, and also has given itself domestic tasks which are not in its charter. The CIA is supposed to operate externally to the country, and the NSA is supposed to worry about security in this country.
Oh.
All right, Homeland Security, which really has only grown up since 9/11, right? The Treasury Department, which controls financial flows. The FISA courts. The A is the Act, Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, that set up these courts. And the Defense and Intelligence Committees in Congress, they work together. Now, interestingly enough, most of the time, these committees just rubber stamp whatever the CIA and NSA want. But there have been times when they've given them flack. And now it seems that some of the members, like Dianne Feinstein and even Marco Rubio, may be questioning the CIA due to the recent leakage from WikiLeaks, which I'll get into later. Vault 7. Okay, next slide. Okay. Next slide. Okay, so the corporate industry constituents consist of the defense industry, which are arms manufacturers and contractors like Halliburton and Kellogg-Brown Root. The intelligence surveillance industry, that's where Silicon Valley comes in, excuse me if I'm blocking it, which is a $50+ billion industry, all having grown up since 9/11. So those of us who question the official story of 9/11, and I'm one of them, are threatening this industry. There's money involved. There's money at stake. So we have to be branded conspiracy theorists, and we'll get into that a little later. All right. Big banks, which Lofgren handled quite well, and Silicon Valley, which he says is now pulling back. And this is amazing. Private industry consists of 854,000 contract personnel with top secret clearance, more than the civilians within the government. Okay, they're being paid, and they are generally paid more than the civilians within the government are paid. Just a quick example that comes into my mind. Remember Blackwater, later called Z Corporation? Okay. They supplied operatives in Iraq who were paid over $900 a day, of which the individuals got around 300 and something. Okay. And Eric Prince and his company got the rest. Right? If there had been servicemen doing it, they might have gotten 200, something like that, per day, full stop. Right? So when these things are farmed out, they're immense bonanzas to these security companies. and contractors. And the fact is that since the Vietnam War, we just don't have enough soldiers to fight our wars. We have to pay, we have to hire soldiers, we have to hire contractors, all right, at immense expense, right? But most Americans just tolerate it. You know, we're not terribly aware of what's going on out there. And you know, the investment that these contractors pay to the Congress people who pass the bills, financing them, and getting Congress to declare these wars, authorize these wars, some of them covert, okay. These congressmen are being paid big bucks by the contractors. Get into that kind of cycle. Okay, and this other thing, the intelligence services contracted out. More than 70% of the intelligence budget goes to private sector companies. So these government functions are being performed by private companies at premium prices. All right, and we're paying. And who's benefiting? It ain't us. Okay, so interestingly enough, Trump brings up the deep state, and then, quick, you know, tamp that down. We don't want people really inquiring into what it is. So I don't know what your local paper said out here about it when it came out. But the great gray lady, or used to be gray lady, the New York Times, the paper of record, assured everybody that it was entirely benign. All right, now, then I looked into another book on the deep state, which actually went a little farther. And here it is. This is the book by Peter Dale Scott, this 87-year-old former professor, former diplomat, who is as sharp as anything right now. And I actually had the honor of meeting him on the day I came to the West Coast. He lives in Berkeley. Wall Street, Big Oil, and the Attack on U.S. Democracy. And he asked the question, cui bono, who profits? And by now, you know who it is. It's these big corporations, whether they're contractors supplying jet planes or building facilities for our soldiers or mercenaries abroad, and then which are abandoned after we lose interest or lose the war. The banks which are deregulated, the industries which are deregulated. And speaking of banks, I just wanted to make a short note here. If you look at Nomi Prince's book, All the President's Bankers, the history of the relationship between bankers and the presidency, you'll see that the scales tipped in favor of the power, the financial power in this country going to the bankers somewhere in the Clinton administration, the late Clinton administration, especially when Glass-Steagall was repealed. And Clinton looks more and more like a deep state agent. And Hillary too. And in the last election, as the Spanish say, I heard, we had a choice between cholera and the plague. Take your pick. And Chris Hedges was even saying, we might need to suffer some real dislocation in order to get rid of Hillary. And it's very painful. And we'll get into why Bernie lost. Anyway, you know, you read this book and you see that Franklin Roosevelt had, you know, he was hated by the wealthy, hated by the banking establishment, except he had two major bankers, Winthrop Aldrich of Chase, who died in 1974, and James Perkins of National City Bank, which became Citibank. They were on his side. They believed that the banks must cooperate. So they worked with FDR to pass the banking regulations and the SEC and so forth. That's Securities Exchange Commission, SEC. But by the time Clinton came around, the bankers had enough power to push back and overthrow the legislation that Roosevelt, and together with these altruistic bankers, had put together. And you know what Glass-Steagall did to separate investment banks from commercial banks. Okay, now go to the next one. Next slide. Back.
Okay.
Yeah, you went to 2.
Is that one more?
Is that the third one? It'll say-
Election for,
Oh, there we go, election corruption.
let's go.
Is that the third one?
I'll start
It-
stuff on the half.
Okay, yeah, third one, okay, that's 1, 2, 3, efforts to rein in, okay, very good, okay. So, you know, when did the deep state start? This is a controversy, because, you know, you could say that the deep state is something very much like the power elite, right? C. Wright Mills' book from 1957, or the oligarchy, or the plutocracy. What is added when we speak of the deep state versus these terms that say, really, the rich people run the show in this country? What is being added? Well, what is being added, to answer my own question, what is being added is the surveillance, the permanent wars. See, we didn't get into permanent wars until really the Vietnam War and thereafter. You know, rich people were really running things. By the way, President Wilson complained about this in 1913, that his hands were tied in certain ways. So presidents have known this, but things have gotten more organized among these oligarchic forces, and also they've been working with government entities and agencies, as Lofgren pointed out very profoundly. When the constitutional government doesn't work, that's when this collusion between corporate and government agencies like the CIA, the NSA, the Department of Defense are acting together to promote their agendas, whose ultimate goal is the enrichment of the corporations, forces, and people that supply these services to the government. Is this democratic? I'll let that question hang in the air, because, very quickly, these are some of the efforts to rein in the deep state. In '61, Kennedy fired Allen Dulles from the CIA pursuant to the Bay of Pigs invasion. He realized how nefarious it was, that it had overthrown the Iranian elected government Mossadegh in '53 and Arbenz in Guatemala in '54. Great human cost. And then had conspired with the Belgians to assassinate Lumumba in the interregnum between Eisenhower and Kennedy. And when Kennedy assumed office and he found out about it, he was devastated, because he saw Lumumba as a great force for freedom in Africa. But anyway, Dulles got rid of Kennedy, and then Dulles was on. He was on the Warren Commission. Can you imagine? He claimed that Bobby Kennedy had wanted him, but we really don't know. Certainly Johnson wanted him. Then the church committee hearings, they were very profound, and I remember them very well. In fact, I wrote Senator Church to praise him in 1975. And you know what I got back? A box of these green-bound government documents. I got the whole thing. I use them as doorstops. I mean, I got the whole record of the church committee hearings. What was I going to do with it? I was going to read it. And then right around the same time, a little after, the Pike Committee, Otis Pike from New York State, a Democratic House member. And these investigations were blocked from publication. They were in the congressional record, but it was never published by members of Congress. But what we do have is a draft of it that you can get for about $45, the Pike Committee hearings. And then we have
What
the jump.
What did they give in the Pike Committee? What
Well,
was
basically,
found out?
they were revealing the CIA's covert operations. Now, I have not read either of these. You know, I know approximately what the CIA was doing back then. It was trying to assassinate Castro and overthrow governments. And at the end of this talk, we'll have a 7-minute movie narrated by John Stockwell that summarizes the way the CIA has preyed on these third world countries and killed by now killed about 20 million people over 40 years. And, you know, Americans don't even know about this. I mean, the CIA was certainly involved in the Suharto repressions that killed 500,000 people in Indonesia in the late 60s. We have a movie about that now. I mean, it's just heartbreaking to think what they've been doing, breaking laws right and left, financing themselves through drug sales, breaking American laws, international laws, completely immoral. And if you want more on that, read The CIA as Organized Crime. It's on the list by Douglas Valentine. I just read that. Yeah. And then we start getting WikiLeaks, all right? Interestingly enough, technology becomes a way of fighting back, just as video cameras and cell phones have recorded police killings, right? Non-judicial killings of unarmed black men, mostly men. We have the vast internet and people who know their way around it, and it's easy to be a leaker anonymously. Oh, Chelsea Manning wasn't terribly anonymous, and she's been part of it. But anyway, so in 2010, WikiLeaks releases the Afghan war diary and the Iraq war logs, and in 2013, Snowden shares thousands of NSA documents with journalists. I think that's still Glenn Greenwald, and then in 2016, right before the election, he releases, Assange releases emails, other documents from the Democratic National Committee and Hillary Clinton. And of course, there's a great enmity between Assange and Hillary Clinton. She has condemned him in no uncertain terms, very piously, you know, saying he works against American interests. You know, we shouldn't know that we murder people gratuitously in Iraq, or that we're surveilling everybody. She's condemned Snowden too in this country. We shouldn't know this. Right? This is, and then 2017, March 7th, Vault 7. Now, there's a great deal of information on YouTube about these things, which I have only recently come into. Interviews for people who know, and to my surprise, even from the right, some interesting stuff is coming. And I'll get into that later. Anyone here heard of Alex Jones?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Everyone knows about Alex Jones except me. I just discovered that. He's a right winger, right? You know that, right? He's a right winger, but he's also a 9/11 truther. And
9/11 truther?
yeah,
And
and he interviews Seymour Hersh, someone I believe in, I like. And he talks about elements of the deep state too, but he stops short of saying that they're acting for the benefit of these corporations.
Huh.
Okay? Because, you know, on the right, you don't really touch the corporations. And of course, the lefties are all crazy, you know, just rabid communists and lefties and progressives. They're written off as having nothing to say. But, you know, if the two sides would get together, the way Nader has predicted the convergence, of course, Nader talks about a convergence of interests between people on the right who are suffering from corporate actions, globalization, and the people who voted for Trump, and people on the left who perceive the depredations of the corporations. This is Nader's utopia. And so that's what he hoped. That's
Can I
true.
ask, what kind of documents were in the CIA documents? What do they talk about?
Oh, get into that, but I'll give you a little preview. Yeah, they talked about the software that's being used to surveil our cell phones,
Ugh.
starting with iPhones and then going to Androids, and the Samsung Smart TV, which is really on when it says it's off, and can be a microphone. I mean,
Oh my God.
this is fantasy stuff, seriously. And yeah, so Assange revealed not just that they exist, but the actual code. Now, there are some pretty serious things here. One, it's out. Anyone can use it. Not just the CIA can surveil you. Putin can too. You know, or some 15-year-old computer genius in Indonesia can, or India. You know, it's out there, and the CIA did not classify it. You know why? Because because they're using the internet to transmit this information. And they just concealed it and hoped no one would notice, because no classified information is allowed by law on the internet. Probably for good reason. Right? So they didn't classify, which means it's public domain. It's proliferated. Right, so Assange has distributed it worldwide. It's blown the CIA's cover on this. And incidentally, it's lowered the value of the stock of Apple and Google.
Wow.
Because who the hell wants those phones that can be so easily penetrated? You know, we'd rather have something made in Finland, for example.
Amazing.
Let's get on.
Wow.
All right. All right. Now, Lofgren doesn't really mention the structural deep events that Peter Dale Scott does. It's very important to understand that not only is this stuff going on like an undercurrent all the time, but every so often there is a strong intervention, some kind of event that shocks the world and causes a number of consequences which financially benefit the deep state. The Kennedy assassination is a perfect example. All right. First of all, the Warren Commission operated a cover-up, and you know the scientific evidence is so overwhelming against their conclusions. And the magic bullet, the bullet that went like this. And we also know that Gerald Ford made the very brilliant suggestion that, hey, why don't we just change the location of the exit wound? Okay. To make it more likely that it was a single bullet. You know, the exit wound was here, let's say, but he wanted to make it up here, see, because then it could have been a single bullet. Why not? Who's going to notice? Right?
Wow.
And if you notice, you're a conspiracy theorist, damn it! Right? So, you know, right. And it was actually Arlen Specter, the senator, the Democratic and Republican, the Democratic senator from Pennsylvania, who came up with the theory of the magic bullet. You know? So, now, what was the consequence of the Kennedy assassination? Well, it was a bonanza for the war industries. Kennedy had said, I'm not going to send American boys, remember this, to fight the battles that Vietnamese boys should be fighting if they wanted to. I mean, Ho Chi Minh was a huge hero. I was in Vietnam in 2014, and I came away with so much respect for Ho Chi Minh. And he was the great promoter of the aspirations of colonies and former colonies. And he always trying to get the attention of Stalin and Mao, you know, the heads of these huge communist empires. And we're just little guys here in Vietnam, but we deserve some consideration too. And look, the Americans are kind of coming after us, not after you. They never tangled with you. Of course, we did tangle with the Chinese in Korea. That's another story. But so the Vietnam War, where, you know, the American statistics are still on my mind. 58,000 soldiers killed. How many Vietnamese were killed? A million? You know, how much land in Vietnam is still untillable? I mean, I flew into Hue and saw the white areas in the middle of the peninsula that were bombed with Agent Orange that are we still can't do anything with. You know? And most people in Vietnam today were born after the end of the war. And I made sure to tell people, you know, I was very sorry and I was protesting the war. And they said, thank you. How can I sell this to you? It was a wonderful place. Vietnam was a fabulous place to visit. Extremely friendly, very cheap. Okay, so then of course we had the anti-war movement. Well, you know, you can get around that and still make your money. Johnson had to resign, okay. Watergate, was that a calculation to get rid of Nixon? I don't know enough to say it definitely was, but there are people who say that's another deep structural event. Then Nixon was pardoned by Ford, and then Ford was not elected again. Then there was the October surprise, the kidnapping of the American diplomats in Tehran, which basically lost the election for Carter. Then the Iran-Contra scandal during the Reagan administration. It's totally illegal dealing with Iran, and the money then was sent to the Contras in Nicaragua, which we weren't supposed to be involved with. And that story was broken by Danny Sheehan, who is one of the major deep state authorities. And he will tell you, I've heard him, you can find the talk on the web. It's a brilliant talk about, oh, you're a 9/11 truther? Be ready for some flack. Here's what I went through when we came up with the Iran-Contra truth in the 80s. And the press wouldn't believe it, and we were dismissed and hated and so forth. This was part of the 9/11 symposium at Cooper Union last September 10th and 11th that I attended. And of course, 9/11 itself, the supposed attacks, which, if you believe the official story, I have a bridge I'd like to sell you. Because if you look at the videos, they couldn't. Even if the heat from the burning jet fuel could melt stainless steel, even if it could, it would have come down slowly, decelerating as the floors slowed it down, right? And it would have tilted, it would have come down first in the section that was burning, and then the other section that was not burning would have maybe come down later or stayed up. But no, it came down symmetrically, all at once, and in an accelerated fashion. You just can't do that from burning. And then Building 7 that wasn't even hit, right?
But they had records they wanted to destroy.
What?
There were records in there they needed to destroy.
Absolutely. CIA records, Enron records. Giuliani's headquarters, right? Maybe the planning for the whole thing, right? So the charges had to be put in earlier. There's a wonderful 9-minute video. If you look up Building 7, there's a wonderful 9-minute video that just shows you how absurd the conclusions were that it came down from debris. Excuse me, the debris hit Buildings 4, 5, and 6, right? Which were shells. They were demolished, right? And Building 7 was left untouched by the debris. And then it came down at 5:20 in the afternoon, a half hour after the BBC said it had come down. I mean, one thing after another. What did the 9/11 Commission have to say about the Building 7? You know? What? Nothing. Exactly. They refused. They refused to even consider it. Excuse me, but this really contradicts our entire thesis. So we're not going to look at this. Talk about conspiracy theory? Yes.
The most telling thing I remember
Yeah.
on that morning was there was a phone call placed to the landlord of Building 7.
Right.
And he said, oh, the humanity, oh, we're going to have to pull that building.
I remember Silverstein.
Well, you mean Larry Silverstein? Yeah. Larry Silverstein, who of course had leased the property. Are you talking about Silverstein?
Yes.
Yeah, right. He said that later. My information is he said it later. We decided to pull Building 7. He said it in the pit. We decided to pull Building 7, and that's demolition speak for demolish. So you're right. But my information is that it came later. But we have it on.
There was actually a phone call before.
She's
That's
referring to
very. I
the
didn't know
phone call
that.
where
We
he
have
was-
it on video that
He
he
was
said this, and
okaying
it's
it
in
with
the.
the
it's in-
insurance people to pull the building, yeah.
Yeah, I've seen it on video too.
Yeah.
And I'll get to you in a second. And then the explanation for that in the Popular Mechanics Guide to refuting all of the 9/11 truth people's arguments. I have it. An introduction by John McCain, so you know it has to be patriotic. They said, oh, he was referring to the firefighters in the building. There were no firefighters in the building. Anyway, yes, sir.
There was an interview on YouTube.
Louder.
There's an interview that you can find on YouTube of Donald Trump being interviewed on the day of 9/11.
Really?
Because, of course, he built all these high skyscrapers, and this was from a mainstream media person. And basically, the news person was saying to Donald, there must have been a defect in this, he built this in the towers, right? Because the way they came down. And Donald Trump said, oh, no, no. He was mystified the way they came down. He says, no, the World Trade Centers were built with all their supporting columns on the periphery. He says, that's why if you look at those buildings, they had very small windows because the supporting structures were on the outside.
Mhm.
And he said there's no way that that could have happened that way because it was built super strong. And, also, we see pictures of planes just flying right through the buildings without even stopping, coming out the other end, which is some type of digital.
Mhm.
But what is interesting, though, actually, Donald was a friend of Silverstein, too, although he still is. But anyway, about a week later, he's interviewed again Donald Trump, and he sort of changed his tune. Definitely changed his tune. So I got the impression, looking at these two YouTube, that he was not in on this, Donald, and he was speaking, as a builder that knows about buildings, and then someone probably said, Donald, you shouldn't really be talking about this. Just leave it alone. Don't get involved in this. And so he sort of, he had a different tune. I don't remember. I think what he was saying. He was just saying.
Very interesting.
Going along with the story. Let's say.
And I really appreciate the books, like easily 10 or 12 books written by a theologian named David Griffiths.
Yeah, of course,
Yeah.
David Ray Griffin.
Oh, he was the guy. I mean, I was going to go crazy if I didn't have those books to read.
Great. Yeah, and
To
Webster
me,
Tarpley's
that was
book, too.
clarity. Somebody was
It's very
telling it
courageous.
the way it had to be told.
Very courageous. All right, yeah, we can go on and on about 9/11. Read the journal of 9/11 stuff.
And they got away with it.
So far. I'm part of the 9/11 Truth Action Project in New York. Yeah, but it's an uphill battle. And largely because of the power of the notion of conspiracy theory. And I want to get into that. Just the book, which you have on your bibliography, the Lancet Haven Smith book, is a very, very useful book. All right. Now, another thing that Mike Lofgren doesn't mention is the role of election corruption in the deep state. And DeHaven Smith does. Peter Dale Scott does not. I mean, they talk about, okay, the Kennedy Assassination, Watergate, 9/11, Iran-Contra, these are all the deep events. But then there's one long, drawn-out event that happens every election, every 2 years, and in between for governorships, which is election corruption, which stymies the voice of the people. Now, we will never know if Bernie really won the Democratic primary. Now,
But he probably would have.
maybe so. I mean, I
I
like
think
to.
he did.
I
A
like
lot
to,
of us are convinced.
Oh, shall we pretend we're a caucus and take the vote? No, sorry.
He won. He won.
won.
What? He won?
He won.
And we decided it's practically unanimous.
He won the California primary too.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh, he
Yes,
won
he
the
did.
whole state of California. That's
He was
great.
manipulated.
Oh, in other words, I can relax on alone.
Of course.
Great, that's great. No, I was prepared for a hostile question. But what's so amazing in the election integrity movement, which is how I know our dear Lori, is that not only will the mainstream media not talk about it, it's a verboten subject. And we're talking about vote flipping. We're talking about electronic voting machines being either programmed to give a certain number more for one candidate and deducted from another candidate so the totals come out the same, or the counting, the tallying afterwards, flipping from votes from one candidate to another. We have this on video. We've seen it. We've seen machines that do this, and also voting machines where you press one choice and it actually registers the other, and you see it, and you can't get it. So
Also vote fractionalizing.
and fractions of a vote. I mean, how many fractional people do we have in this room? Okay, so we have this very hard evidence of it occurring, and yet you won't find one word of it in the Times or the Washington Post, or the Boston Globe, or the mainstream media, nor in The Nation and the other progressive media. Mother Jones and these Times. You know, I'm a longtime Nation subscriber, and here I am, you know, just getting into the election integrity movement, and I'm connected with Jonathan Simon, who now lives in San Francisco, and Mark Crispin Miller, and they say, oh yeah, Joel, just go talk to the Nation, see what you do. They knew I was getting it. So, you know, little me, bushy-tailed, goes down to Irving Place, and I have an appointment with the managing editor, Rowan Carey. Right? And he's very nice to me. After all, I'm a subscriber. I love The Nation, blah, blah, blah. And I talk to him. He's very concerned. Yes. And then I send him some documents, including the Amy Goodman interview with Harvey Wasserman, who was a colleague of Bob Petraeus. They worked together. And Amy's a skeptic, too, by the way. She doesn't know anything.
Very much so.
She don't know.
She's the best journalist in the United States of America right now.
Yeah, I love Amy Goodman, but she was a skeptic about election corruption, and yet she agreed to have Harvey Wasserman in and questioned him. How was it Obama won if there's an election corruption? Well, the Republicans couldn't overcome his advantage. He may have won by 12% in 2008, and of course he officially won by 7%. All right, so they couldn't overcome. So a few months later, I see in the online Nation an article by Joshua Holland saying that, oh, these election corruption people, they're all conspiracy theorists. It blew me off. So Marcus and Miller said, yeah, you got it, Joel. See, we knew that was going to happen. So when I read the book, The CIA as Organized Crime, which you have on your list, he talks about the compliant media, right? Right. There's the ultras, the media of the ultras, you know, the right-wing Fox News and New York Post and so forth. Forget that, they live in mythology. But then there's the mainstream media, which try to reassure everyone that everything's okay. NPR, New York Times, those are my sources in the New York area. And then there's the compliant progressive media, who are on a little longer tether. And they'll tell you about all these sad cases and the people who are working hard to reverse injustice in the country, and yet they won't go near 9/11 truth, JFK assassination, election corruption. Won't touch it. And the Democrats won't either. And they're the big losers, we think. Okay, so how do we apply our knowledge of the deep state to this question? Why the hell don't the Democrats complain about election corruption? And the answer is, anyone?
Because they manipulated themselves?
That's right, they're using it too. They're using it too for Bernie. All right? So by keeping election corruption a non-issue, by pretending it doesn't exist, the Democrats can use it to put down anyone who questions these deep state arrangements. After all, Bernie was willing to take money away from the defense establishment to give it to education, healthcare, infrastructure, right? People, instead of rich people. I mean, they're, the super people don't really exist. They're just, so voters, forget it. So clearly the Constitution is broken down. The democratic process is broken down. Now, there are always cracks, and I want to look at some of them with you. Okay.
Can I add one part of
Yeah, sure.
the deep state? Maybe I should.
You need to be on
The
mic.
microphone? I'll take advantage of this moment. You're going to comments. Take a drink.
Yeah.
How's our time going? All right, we're good. Not even an hour.
Hi. As you know, I've been involved with election integrity for a long time, and when we started having the Jill Stein recount, I thought our time had come. And what I discovered was that when the recount was beginning, what I discovered is that election officials, many of them, are sort of small people in the deep state, because they are career professionals in government, and they don't want anything bad happening on their watch. And whether they're Democrats or Republicans, they're committed to nothing happening on their watch and to trusting computer totals. Okay? And this happened with the Democrats in Pennsylvania, and of course the Republicans in Wisconsin and Michigan. Another part of the deep state is actually the professionals that are part of electronic voting machine companies. And the company Dominion Voting, which used to be Diebold, that moved to Canada when they had gotten such a bad name and changed their name, created fractionalized voting. And this was brought out by Bev Harris, where you can make one person's vote half a vote, another person's vote a vote and a half, or 2 votes. Or even, you can do whatever fraction you want. And so then you get to choose the percentage that your candidate wins by without anything looking suspicious, like more votes have been added to the vote totals than there were voters, which is what happened in Ohio, which was very unskillful in 2004, okay? And so this was a system around that. And I wanted to let you know I was pretty shocked when I talked to Bev Harris, who I've been working with since 2003, and she said that Dominion Voting had started fractionalized voting for marketing purposes. And I was shocked hearing this. So I ended up speaking to the woman who went up to interview Dominion Voting, and they talked to Dr. Eric Coomer, who, and I'm a little bit nervous saying this, but I think I'm going to say it. Dr. Eric Coomer, who has said he designed this for marketing purposes, and that the website says that they love giving their customers a satisfying election experience. Now, a dishonest person might interpret that one way and an honest person another way, all right? So the thing that happened was this woman, Sharon Maroney, she was a very kind of driving person as an interviewer, and she asked him, who do you let into the data room as they were leaving? And he looked kind of uncomfortable, and he said, well, anybody we see fit. Okay? And now, I would like you to imagine, and by the way, just by chance, interestingly enough, Dominion is right next to George Soros's foundation in Toronto. The offices are on the same floor, which, made the conservatives think that it was, George Soros that's manipulating all the elections. But, they're all part of the deep state. Anyway, what happened is I wanted to look at Sharon Maroney's website where she talked about this interview. So I would get it really exact. I would get the spelling of Dr. Eric Coomer's name just right. There was a caution on Norton Security about going to Sharon Coomer's defendthevote.com. But I went anyway. Mm-hmm. Well, I ended up getting 200,000 viruses
Wow.
on my email, on my computer. And Ed was there trying to help me. It was going on his too, and a lot of others. And we ended up finding that it came from Sharon Maroney's site. Okay? So I want to suggest a little imagination exercise if you were a voting machine executive who had designed fractionalized voting, and you revealed some fairly uncomfortable information that made you feel uncomfortable later about your interview with Sharon Maroney, might you put a lot of viruses in her site. Just think about it, so that you could immobilize it, all right? And I practically had to get a new computer. It was terrible what was going on, and Ed finally saved the day. But 3 different times we got 200,000 viruses on my computer. And Norton Security gave up, Kaspersky gave up. Finally we had, Watchdog?
We used a hardware spam filter called MX Guard Dog.
MX Guard Dog, which we still have. But I just wanted to say, I am very suspicious of this. And the last thing I wanted to say, and this is just my contribution to your thing, is there is something called preserving ballot images, which are photographs of ballots that a lot of election registrars routinely destroy for reasons I can tell later if there's time. And that is, could help us have elections that we could count, because paper ballots are put in a big warehouse and held for 30 days before you can look at them. And it's very cumbersome and expensive, and the registrars really push hard against you doing it. Okay, so, I'm sorry,
Okay,
it was
thank you.
long, but.
Thank you. Yeah, no, every one of these issues represents volumes and volumes of information. So we're trying to summarize a lot here. But I'm sure you got the point that election corruption is one of the major tools with which the deep state stays in power. And
you're also saying it doesn't matter what side of the aisle we're talking about.
oh yeah,
Both establishment parties are part of it.
exactly. And remember, both parties are feeding into the same trough, the same corporate troughs. All right? I like to think of the Republicans as the corporation's whores and the Democrats as the corporation's handmaidens. So take your choice. And then when an upstart candidate comes along, they put him on television, for God's sakes. He got the same rights as everybody else. It's just that when in the back rooms, they sneakily destroyed his candidacy. And then they told him to go along with the program. So he started.
So did Mr. Salzberger.
What's that?
So did Mr.
Oh, yeah.
Salzberger.
Are you kidding? The New York Times and the Washington Post supported Hillary right and left. I mean, there was even an article in Harper's about, there was something like 14 negative articles about Bernie to one positive one. It was so, the reporting was so prejudicial. And then Jill Stein. Oh my God. I mean, I know people who, in New York, who think of themselves as very well informed because they read the New York Times. And you know how laborious it is to read the New York Times? You know, you read the New York Times and you're done with the news. Yeah, I've done it, I've paid with my time and sweat. And I don't need to know anything else. That's pretty damn complete, right? And I hate Jill Stein. She was a spoiler, right? Hold on. Jill Stein was the only honest person running in that election. The only honest person. How can you say that? Plus, she's lovely.
We both vote for her.
Bravo. And I know her. And she's going to be on my panel, my election integrity panel, at the Left Forum on June 2nd. So please come to New York. Yes.
There was a statistical summary of about 13 states where the exit polls versus the actual results were impossible.
We're impossible.
Impossible.
That's right.
And can we assume that was like a little manipulation, very neat programming?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, Jonathan Simon, I think I have, his book is on your
So I'm going to
right?
request
Code Red. What?
I'm going to request we hold our questions at the end, and then maybe have whoever wants to ask them up. It just would help us out.
Okay.
In terms of the people.
Yeah,
that are
because you
listening.
can't be heard on the
Sorry.
Yeah, Jonathan Simon said that, there were discrepancies between 4.1 and 7% in, say, X number of congressional races in 2014, and between the exit polls and the actual results. And remember that a 2% discrepancy triggers a recount according to our State Department in elections in foreign countries. Right? So we have these discrepancies that start at twice that. right? And go to almost four times that in our country. No one says a word. And Simon estimated that if these had actually been honest elections, the Democrats would have 80 more House members than the Republicans. You know, and in 2014, there were something like 1.5 million more Democratic votes for the House than Republicans, yet the House went for the Republicans because of gerrymandering. And then mostly gerrymandering. I mean, and no one says anything after the election. And then you get these damn phone calls to donate to all these Democratic candidates. And I tell them now, I'm not giving you any money until you look at 2 elections, because you're basically asking me to finance your winning by 55 or more %. Why should I donate money? Why should I work? Why should we all work that hard in these purple states, in these swing states? You know, if you were actually honest and admitted people coming up from the people, like Michael Moore says, you know, don't start a third party. Just, you know, run as a progressive in the Democratic Party. Yeah, right, Michael. He doesn't know, or he didn't know at the time that he was recommending this. Remember, did anyone hear him say that? Yeah. Don't start a third party. Don't give up on the parties. Just run as a progressive Democrat. We have the Progressive Democrats Association on the East Coast. I follow those in New Jersey. But then they call up and they have the chutzpah to ask us for money when they're just throwing away 5%. Anyway, so I lecture them on the phone. Okay. And then how many emails do you get a day? We're going to ask for questions at the
Yeah,
end.
do you think Bernie should have spoken? Oh, sorry.
Bernie should have spoken up?
About corruption.
If he had been, you know, and the Democrats pulled something on him. They may have threatened him. I don't know what goes on behind it. I've heard him speak since the election. All right. Now I wanted to address the question of the notion of conspiracy theory, and this book is on your bibliography. Lance DeHaven Smith. All right. Conspiracy Theory in America. A short book, 200 pages, immensely informative, and it tells us, for example. Oh, by the way, let's go to the next slide. Let's see what I did here. Stop. Okay. Oh, I lost it. Anyway, okay. So what is the story about it? Well, in 1967, the CIA decided that they would turn conspiracy theory into a term of a pejorative term. Right? Conspiracy theorists were these nutty people who wouldn't go along with the program, who had these bizarre notions that Kennedy was killed by some kind of crazy conspiracy. We all know that wasn't true, because we all know that the official story had to be the right one, because you trust your government. And so the notion of conspiracy theory from that point on became a pejorative term. And yet DeHaven Smith said, hey, wait, hold a second. You know, look at the Declaration of Independence, for God's sakes. It's a conspiracy theory. It's connecting the dots. It's all these things King George did to us. You know, and ultimately, if you put them all together, you know, obviously taxation without representation, but they started wars among the Native Americans and slave revolts. The British did this, you know, to undermine the American colonies. Right? All these things that are listed, you know, in the boring part of the Declaration of Independence. It's a conspiracy. It's connecting the dots and saying, hey, he's trying to remove our democratic rights as Englishmen. That's what he's ultimately trying to do, trying to oppress us. Okay, so then the founders said, you know, you can't trust people with power. They knew their history of these monarchs, you know, and these conspiratorial, treasonous nobles, these aristocrats who get together. So they created a government that was so balanced with checks and balances. We all learned that, right? It's civics class, checks and balances. That in order to get anything done, you have to compromise with your opponents. And your opponents are trying to get the dirt on you, and you're trying to get the dirt on them. Right? And you're watching each other like hawks, right? Watching out for impeachable offenses, right? and hanky-panky, if not treason. Everyone's watching everybody. Because they knew that everyone had the capacity to be corrupt. Anyone could be suspected of corruption. Right? So conspiracy theory, that whole country was founded on conspiracy theories. Connect the dots, see who's violating what laws behind the scenes. Right? So it's a total mistake to think that democracy functions on the basis of civility and respect for each other. Yeah, of course you don't go hitting each other, killing each other. You stay within the law, but you're trying to find out the dirt on your opponent. Okay, so go on.
Next.
Yeah, and what about the right-wing conspiracy theories, like the communists are trying to take over the world, or the U.S. bureaucracy was riddled with communists and their sympathizers? Remember these? The civil rights and anti-war movements were communist influenced or even inspired. J. Edgar Hoover's theories. This is total bullshit. Conspiracy theories. All right, not every conspiracy theory is correct, of course, but they were flying in all directions. And yet, you have otherwise rational people who say, don't talk to me about 9/11, anything other than the commission report is a conspiracy theory. Don't talk to me about the JFK. So forth. You've heard this, I'm sure. Have you?
Mm-hmm.
You've run into people. And you can say, what can you say to those people? Well, I mean, it's possible that the laws of physics were suspended that day. That's what I say. It provokes them. One of my dearest friends, a scientist whom I've known since the 5th grade, said, that 9/11 truth stuff, that's all junk science. He finally said, okay, Joel, I'll give you half an hour. So I went over his house, and I looked up that 9-minute video on Building 7, watched it, and then he signed my petition for reopening the investigation.
That was cool.
He's an honest man. All right. So here's DeHaven Smith's definition. The term conspiracy theory is applied pejoratively to allegations of official wrongdoing that have not been substantiated by the public officials themselves. Oh, okay. Right. So if they don't self-indict, right, it's conspiracy theory. Well, that's somewhat of a simplification, because if you know anything about 9/11, it's hugely complex. Okay, so Lance DeHaven Smith talks about these events, instead of deep structural events, he calls them state crimes against democracy, or SCADs. And I love this little acronym, because once you have an acronym, then it feels like, oh, this is history. Yeah, oh, you mean you don't believe in SCADs? What are SCADs? Well, they're state crimes against democracy. Numbskull. And they're done all the time. They happen all the time. And so these people who warn against conspiracy theory are saying, well, don't connect the dots. Don't read the Declaration of Independence. Okay, they tend to see each incident in isolation. And he calls these perceptual silos. I love that term, perceptual silos. You keep all your information about, say, Watergate in one silo, and then the information about 9/11 in another silo. But Dick Cheney was there both times.
We call those coincidence theorists.
Coincidence theorists?
Yeah, coincidence.
Right.
They believe it was a coincidence.
Anyway, also we tend not to be suspicious of political elites. Yeah. Okay, so, and once again, the mistaken belief that democracy is based on public trust and civility. It ain't. It's based on suspicion all around, and negotiating with your opponents. That's the way our system is set up. It's breaking down. It's breaking down. Because the two parties, again, are feeding at the same trough. They're not really opponents. But yet, on the political scene, the partisanship is rabid. right? So it becomes dysfunctional in the occurrence, in the daily workings of our government. And that's when the deep state needs to come in and say, well, here's what we need to do. Here's what we need to have done. Now, these right-wing sources like Alex Jones, who are serious Trump supporters, they believe that Trump is going to reform things, do not, somehow the fact that he's appointed all these billionaires to his cabinet has just gone right by them. And they're not asking the question, you know, who benefits from these scads, from these deep state actions. And they're coming out, and they're former military people they interview, and they're former ex-CIA people like Steve, what does his name say it again? Pichenik, right. He's very convincing. He's very convincing. And he's there as a patriot, saying he doesn't like the corruption of the CIA. And damn it, I agree with him. But he's not talking about who profits from permanent war, and that's what the CIA is up to. You read the Douglas Valentine book, The CIA as Organized Crime, and you see that the Phoenix program that was developed as a subversive program to corrupt people and to get them to change sides during the Vietnam War, and to target people who wouldn't be corrupted and assassinate them, right, has been used and refined in Afghanistan and Iraq. And this is supposed to win wars for us. And guess what? If it doesn't, we still make money. That's the genius of permanent war. And whose money is it? Whose money is it?
The oligarchs.
It's our money. It's our money. It's our money. So it's theft. That's what's going on.
You did talk about the generals. Maybe you want to mention.
The generals?
Yeah, the generals and their relationship with the defense company.
Yeah, right, where they leave the employee of the government and they go into the defense. I mean, that's part of the revolving door that, you know, in many departments, health. All right, so. Okay, and also the lesson of Nuremberg is that modern liberal democracies are very vulnerable to being hijacked by authoritarian leaders willing to carry out ruthless conspiracies. Now, the neocons like to cite Leo Strauss. Leo Strauss is conservative political theoretician, political philosopher you might call him, who in a kind of a Platonic way said that leaders must be able to tell noble lies in the interests of the benefits of the whole country, right? But once the elites become beholden to the moneyed interests, the ethos of noble lies becomes completely corrupted and self-serving. So that's what you can tell the next neocon you run into on the street. Okay, and U.S. military and intelligence elites frequently and routinely manipulate public opinion and domestic affairs as a matter of policy. And then this gets us into false flag operations. And here, this is a very fascinating and somewhat gray area. Kevin Barrett, I gave you 3 Kevin Barrett books. Kevin Barrett has been quite eloquent about false flag operations. And I haven't read all of his books yet, but I've met him. Very, very interesting guy. So, let's say we accept the notion of the deep state, and we accept the series of scads, right, state crimes against democracy. Then we can apply this kind of orientation, this political philosophy or political economics, to other questions, such as the war on drugs and mass incarceration. And this is my contribution. And this is what I would like to ask the next time I see Peter Dale Scott. So I'll give you a very quick summary. How does this mass incarceration work? First of all, the statistics of mass incarceration. Why don't we move ahead? Let's see if we can catch up. Oh yeah. In 1980, we had 300,000 people behind bars in this country. 2010, we had 2.3 million. Okay, we had an additional 5.1 or 2 million on some kind of community parole where they had to report. And then many more millions were ex-felons, which means they couldn't get jobs, they had to check the box, as I say. They couldn't get public housing, they couldn't get food stamps, okay? So their lives were severely narrowed by their status as ex-felons. Well, how did they become felons in the first place? Many were simply drug offenders, nonviolent drug offenders. Many were simply rounded up. And police, in many jurisdictions, go to poor areas and will round up young black men and then bring them to court and then charge them with all kinds of possession, sales, drug offenses, and stack on the charges. And then the poor public defenders are so overwhelmed, they'll say, just plead out on something. But I didn't do nothing, just plead out on something. Because if they convict you, and how bad they are, if they convict you, you'll get 16 years in jail or 25 years in jail. And if you admit to something, they'll give you 3 years and you'll be out. So many plead guilty without having committed any crimes. There was one instance of a woman with 2 children who was caught up in one of these dragnets and decided to play it safe and plead guilty, although she hadn't done anything. And then the other people who were in the same dragnet kept protesting, and the judge dismissed everything, and she had to go to jail.
How horrible.
So this is what's happening. And,
Central Park 5.
and I asked myself, do you remember the term sphere of affection, which was popular in sociology about 40 years ago? And I think of it as sphere of empathy. And it's something that I, as a white person, ask myself. How important, how relevant, how outraged am I at these things happening, not just to middle-class black people, or not to middle, but to poor black people? I see them in subways begging. I see them in New York all the time. Not terribly savory people, but I'm not taking any surveys. So these people are segregated off from white communities. So we don't really see what's happening. And yet we have the highest incarceration rate in the world. We have more people in jail than China does, a repressive society with 4 times our population. Right? This is an outrage, it's a scandal. Now, as Michelle Alexander points out, it's based on color blindness. Right? This is not Jim Crow, where things were segregated. Jim Crow is an improvement on slavery, right? Because you had to be paid for your work, but you could be put in the back of the bus or in a separate train car. That's Jim Crow. So that was made illegal. So it's now colorblind. And they can arrest all these people. It's not because you're black. No, we have suspicions. And the Supreme Court has not admitted that statistical evidence is valid, that the overwhelming number of these people are black, even though drug use is the same in black and white communities. There's no difference. Okay? So you get the picture, right? So the question is, how does this serve the deep state?
It's the new slavery.
Well, that's something else. If you saw the movie 13th, the Ava DuVernay movie, did you see it?
I haven't, but I
Oh
would
yeah,
like to.
the slavery, when they're in jail, they work for $1.30 a day, and American corporations come and have them do their manufacturing. They bring their plants back from Bangladesh and have them do it in American jails, and then the jails, certainly the private jails, farm out their laborers, right? There's more money to be made there. That's
And it's
another form
also the
of
prison industrial complex.
That's right, yeah.
One way of looking at it is, you mentioned CIA as organized crime.
Yeah.
And I look at these as lines of business. And they, whoever they are, have a bunch of different lines, and they're running them like serious business entities.
Yeah. Well, the CIA is heavily involved in the international drug trade and also arms trade. I mean, it's incredible that where there's money to be made, never mind laws, never mind American principles. Well, one of the main things that this does is it makes these people into non-voters. It deprives them of the franchise. Why is this? Of course, this is terrible. Everyone should have this. But guess what? How did Obama win in 2008? You may have your different opinions of Obama. And I certainly do not approve of everything he's done, but he was certainly better than McCain or Romney. All right? He won with the black vote and the female vote. A majority of white guys voted for the Republicans. We have a lot to answer for, we white guys. I think we have to speak for all of us. But in
And
any
the youth
case,
vote.
in other words,
And the youth vote too.
what's that?
I think the youth vote as well.
You think what?
The
Youth.
millennial vote, the under.
Oh, the younger
30s
people.
got him into office. as
Yeah.
well. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah, the old farts went for the Republicans. So, my point is that we progressives need the black vote. And to the extent that it is deactivated, whether by gerrymandering, which is being contested in courts successfully in North Carolina, it's horrible in North Carolina. It's pretty bad in Pennsylvania, too. Or the interstate cross-check scheme, which Greg Palast exposed in his wonderful movie, The Best Democracy Money Can Buy, A Tale of Billionaires and Ballot Bandits. There was an early book, The Best Democracy, an earlier book, The Best Democracy Money Can Buy, the election of 2000. This is his second one by the same title but with a different subtitle. I saw it in the movies twice, and I read the book. It's a little thin book, and you can see it for free on Facebook. Go to Greg Palast Investigates and scroll down, and you can see this movie, this 90-minute movie, for free. It's brilliant, and the guy did the graphics for that movie who did Roger Rabbit. So it's really entertaining. It's just all about statistics, but it's very entertaining. It's very, very visually arresting. Okay, so he shows how these criminals, Karl Rove, who should have been in jail long ago, but Obama didn't want to do nothing, and Chris Kobach, the Secretary of State of Kansas, got together and canvassed the 29 states who are run by Republicans and got these voter lists and matched up, you know this, I mean, matched up first and last names, never mind different middle names, different suffixes, and different social security numbers, then claimed that these people had voted in multiple states, just because they had the same first and last names. That was called the interstate cross-check system. And Palast exposes it. All right? Now that deactivated about over 1 million votes. They sent these postcards to people saying that their registrations were questioned and they had to return the postcard or show up at their registrar's office. And a number of, millions of people did this. And then those who didn't, they just said, well, this is bullshit, I've been voting for years. Got to their polling place and they couldn't vote. Black people, Hispanics, Asians, people who are likely Democratic voters. Right? Totally illegal. Palast exposed it. Where was this brilliant movie talked about in the press? Virtually nowhere. It was mentioned in Rebecca Solnit's introductory article to the Harper's in the April issue. That was it. It's the only. And he advertised in the Nation.
Oh.
I once asked him, "What do you think of the Nation?" Because he said, "I really don't like the Nation." I didn't understand why. I thought, "Oh, maybe the articles are too complicated." No, it's because he knew very well that the Nation is on a tether, on a long tether, but it's on a tether to the deep state. Okay? So that's how Trump won. And here's Trump saying there were all this voter fraud, right? Because people with the same first and last name voted in 6 and 8 states, right? That's voter fraud, right? As Palast said, you can do that's hard federal time if you actually did that. You went to the trouble to do that, right? So that's what Trump was talking about. He was just giving the line of Rove and Kobach. So that's the country we're in. Now, what can we do about this? Let's move on to the last slide. What can we do about this?
Salutary trend.
What?
You want to do?
Go through these. Let's see what else.
We're
Oh yeah,
done.
this is the point, Draga. This is the point
Next
about
one, or-
Michelle Alexander. Okay, go to the next one. Okay, salutary trends. Oh yeah, legalization of recreational marijuana. Okay, this means that you can't be arrested for having marijuana, even just for fun, in certain states. I think California is one of them, right?
Yes.
Well, bravo, chapeau, as they say in French. You know? Yeah. All right, Obama's mass release of nonviolent prisoners. He released 6,000. He wanted to 46,000 out of 100,000. Remember, we're talking about 2.5 million now. Not all, some of them are violent. But no, their sentences were commuted. In other words, he said, okay, you've done enough time, get out, we're freeing you. Well, great, but they're still felons. As Michelle Alexander says, felon is the new nigger, the new N-word. All right? Now, but with Trump and Sessions, they're pushing things back. Okay, next slide. Okay, here it is. What can you do? Now, this is me. Well, first of all, inform yourself. You know, people say, oh, you know, I read the news and one person says one thing and the other person, I don't know who to believe. Well, the answer to that, my friend, is to read books. I'm sure I don't have to tell this audience that. But you read books and the authors present a massive amount of evidence in reasoned arguments through many chapters, and it's convincing. When you just read news articles, they're just telling you the surface of things. So, and they're fascinating. These are quick reads too. They're not complicated books. So take these lists home. So once you do that, you get to be able to listen to a news report and say, oh, they're avoiding this. They're not talking about this. They wouldn't go there. We know this, and I'm not giving to my NPR station anymore. Well, I'm not just saying what you should or shouldn't. I don't say that. I send money to WBAI, which is the KPFA of the East Coast. Now, see, work with election integrity movement. See, I still believe that the election integrity movement is like the pivot, the fulcrum of the deep state. You know, these people are violating overt laws. I mean, how do you get someone, you know, who votes money to pay for contractors in a war in Afghanistan? It's very hard. But someone who's faking elections, corrupting elections, flipping votes, that's real violations, right? Right here and now, right close by, and your news media are not reporting on it. So as hard as this is, it's still, I think, one of the weakest links in the deep state structure. Because if we can push that, then we can get actual progressives to run and be elected and change some of these things. Okay. Work to oppose the war on drugs. This is already happening with the reversal of marijuana laws, but the war on drugs is a giant boondoggle, a racist boondoggle. And here's something that I do. Call me crazy, but you know, someone comes on an NPR interview with me in New York with Brian Lehrer or Leonard Lopez, and they're experts, right? They don't bring in my experts. They don't have Jonathan Simon on. They don't have Bob Petrakis or Marcus Miller on. But they have some election expert from some institute. And he gets off, and I look him up, and I send him an email. Sometimes they respond. They should know that there are people out there who are informed about these things. And then there are also spokespeople on the left who have not taken positions on such issues as election integrity. And those people should be pressed to speak more clearly on these things. You know, Chomsky won't go near 9/11, for example. Chris Hedges won't go near. And I once confronted him when he was speaking.
What did he say?
He said, oh, you know, I'm not a scientist. He punted. I'm not a scientist. Chris Hedges. I went to the March on Science in Washington, D.C. a week ago Saturday. And one of my favorite signs was, I'm not a scientist, but I'm also not an idiot. All right? And then the other thing that I mentioned that I did, press Democratic office holders and their fundraisers to pay attention to election integrity issues. They shouldn't have to win by 55% or more just to win. We have a guy named John Wisniewski running for the Democratic nomination for governor in New Jersey. He's a genuine progressive. And I went to one of his presentations on health care, and I collared him afterwards and said, you know, are you aware of the election integrity issues? And he wasn't. He didn't know about it. Oh, would you send me stuff? Sure. I sent him a ton of stuff. Anyway, thank you so much for your kind attention and for your laughter. It's been a gas. It's been wonderful talking to this audience, and I want to take you all home with me to the East Coast, but you may have prior commitments. Anyway, thanks a lot.
Can I add some specifics about
Yeah, and people can ask questions now. What time is it?
Well,
Oh, it's
I
only
just wanna
9:20. You
add,
don't have to go to bed.
like
so-
your list of what to do's,
Yeah,
okay?
yeah.
I want to mention that what I was telling some of you about ballot images is a very important thing, because if you have a paper ballot and if you question your election, and if you're not allowed to look at it for 30 days, and if the media celebrates the new winner, your ability, there's never been one person that's gotten on, has been able to get past that hurdle, okay, of getting to have a significant political office based upon having been able to look over the results, okay? So at the Institute for American Democracy and Election Integrity, which is one of the subdivisions of Sunrise Center, and also, there is a chance to suggest to election officials that it's beneficial for them to support saving ballot images. And most election officials don't like the extra work of doing any kind of recount, okay? And now in California, I want you to know, here in Marin County, we have one of the oldest systems that is the most subject to vote fractionalizing. And that may have happened in a very funny election with Veolia taking over Nevada's water supply and their sewage system. And I was there as a part of a recount, and it was kind of very questionable because the polls were showing a very different outcome. But I want to say, if you spoke to your election registrar, if vote fractionalizing became better known, and you can go to blackbox.voting.org, Beverly Harris's site, to get more information. We need to update a lot of our equipment here in California because we don't even have ballot images on some of it. Now, in some states like Wisconsin and Michigan, they have ballot images, but they destroy them. And they say, we're destroying them because you have paper ballots, so we don't need this. This is extra information. But trying to get to the ballot images is extremely difficult, okay? And one of the things that was particularly depressing also for me, as I worked with the Wisconsin recount and with Bob Petrakis, was ES&S that has ballot images, which
ES&S, the manufacturer of voting
Yes,
machines,
thank you.
electronic voting machines.
Yes, they're one of the largest.
Republican identified
Oh, well,
corporation,
thank you, that's really good to
ES&S.
say. Thank you, Joel. It's a very, very large voting machine company. Takes ballot images. Most of the election registrars destroy them. But I want you to know that in the Wisconsin recount, the source code was missing. It was supposed to be in a vault. So Jill Stein's lawyers and Bob Petrakis have been in legal negotiations with ES&S to be able to look at the source code. The source code helps determine what the real vote totals were, okay? Well, ES&S is fighting that and saying, we'll only let you look at the source code if you do not say to the public anything that you find out.
I mean, it gets pretty ridiculous.
So we are really up against a deep state in our election integrity movements as well. And we need to, we need to really speak and get to know our election officials, and because many of them are good people. They want to see democracy happen, and actually we have two stars in our state here that were awarded a prize by my institute in 2010. One of them was Carolyn Cernich of Humboldt County, which they do one set of votes with Hardinger Civic and another set with Open Source County, and then Yolo County where they count 10%. So I'm just saying, supporting the ones that do good Or what do you know, and encouraging Marin County, which is really far behind, and the registrar to change their vote system.
Well,
Yeah?
I have a question about that,
Let's
because,
have questioners come up, please,
oh,
if you're willing to.
sure.
Yeah.
And Joel, could you go up there too, or
Wanna
move
go
your
up
head
there?
so it's not in front of the
I'm
camera?
aware that California is working on a election bill to look more like how Colorado carries out elections, which is similar to Oregon. It seems like, it seems like there's a movement to try to make elections more uniform across the country. And to me, that seems like the most practical way to go. Would you say?
Well,
And also, I really think the Women's March effort could be a catalyst for so much of this, and I think somebody's gotten their hands on this group and is trying to marginalize them, and I think that's very unfortunate. I think they could
Who said
run with
that?
it, some of these reforms that
Which group are you referring to?
Women's March.
Is that a constituted group?
Yeah. Oh, they've got a leadership element going, but I think they've become more cultural. They're losing their political effort that they could carry on with. And I'm going to send them the reform ideas that Lofgren has in his book, because I've been studying his book and I'm thinking, woo, this is powerful material he's putting out. But they overlook the environment. He overlooks the environment. We need to evolve there, I think. And then I've recently learned that Richard Dreyfuss is big on pushing more civics in our country to get more people a little more savvy, and why not have that become part of this a new national movement, to
Well,
have
civics.
people that are engaged in how our government should work.
How
So,
well informed?
I'm just
is the
throwing out some
civics?
ideas here.
You know, do they talk about the deep state and how the deep state profits from gridlock? Do they talk about the war on drugs, the fake war on drugs as a simulacrum, as a pretext to oppress black people? Is this part of civics or sociology?
Well, I guess it
Or
depends on who's gonna
criminology.
run it. I mean, if Richard Dreyfuss is determined this should happen, maybe you should talk to Richard Dreyfuss.
That's a very good idea.
That's
I
my
love his
idea.
work. I love his acting work, sure. Yes. Do you want to come up and say that? No, you wanted to repeat what
How
you said?
does the,
Well, repeat the question
Go ahead.
then.
how does the deep state profit from gridlock? You
Oh,
mentioned.
So repeat the
when
question.
people,
Repeat the question.
how does the deep state profit from gridlock? It's a very good question, because you have to see how people's attitudes permit things to happen, like create political vacuums. Now, how many people, and I'm looking around and I'm gauging the average age here, I won't say it, but if any of you have professional interactions with young people, meaning see a lot of young people, and you ask, ask about their political opinions or their political involvement, how much they keep up with the news, I, as a former college English teacher, found it rather low. And it's been said, even in a New York Times magazine article, that so many young people get their news from comedy shows, right? From when Jon Stewart was on The Daily Show, and his replacement now, so, which is fine, but it's the surface of the superficial. So most people, or many people, are confused or frustrated. The news is not terribly helpful. It lets contradictions fester. That's why you have to read books to understand what the forces are behind the news. Because NPR ain't gonna tell you. And they tout themselves so much. Okay, so frustration and apathy create a political vacuum which allows these deals to be made, the wars to go on. I mean, how many people who are frustrated with the news realize how many secret CIA operations are out there? You can find out about them. You really have to dig. You're not going to find it in the news, even if you look in your daily paper. Right? So there's huge amounts of money changing hands. Our money. that's profiting from this confusion and apathy. What?
Gridlock?
Yeah, gridlock. Gridlock gives rise to confusion and apathy. When you say, "Oh, the Congress isn't doing anything. Why should I follow? Why should I follow them?" That's one more symptom of the ineffectiveness of constitutional government. So why should I follow it? I learned all this stuff about checks and balances in my civics class as a senior in high school. Blah blah. It's not happening. Yeah. Frank?
20 minutes before I arrived here, on NPR, on the business program, I don't know if anyone else heard it, but the fellow who narrates that program said that Trump said what is it, putting a stay on spending for a few days might be a good thing. In other words, let them stop spending money. And then the business guy said the people who would actually hurt the most would be the contractors, all those military contractors, because they don't have unemployment or this or that. So that was their concern, was, that they would lose so much.
The poor contractor. In other words, a moratorium on spending that would last 2 or 3 days,
Right.
something like that. Of course, it's not going to happen. I mean, every time the government shuts down, the Republicans have threatened and actually carried out these government shutdowns. They've been horrible. Then we don't pay our bills. But it's a kind of a slash and burn, coarse, frustrated, violent reaction to that kind of thing. Sir.
The uprising has been taking place on the right, beginning with the Tea Party movement, and culminating in people looking at Donald Trump and going, he's not Hillary. He's not the neocons. He's not the Wolfowitz and Sheepowitz's clothing. And so the point is that these people, and people that I know, go, why are you voting for Donald Trump? How could you, don't you see? And they're going, no, he has the potential to dismantle the deep state. Now, of course, he's now turned the other way. He's, the neocons, blah, blah, blah. But he woke up a lot of people. They know exactly everything you said about the prison industrial complex. There's conservative activists who work very, very hard to prevent attacking Iran, along with the progressives. So there's already a movement of people who understand, who are, they're more like Ron Paul than Rand Paul.
Mm-hmm.
But this guy, Robert Steele, in this little wonderful audio interview, he's talking about a coalition of, he's been working with Cynthia McKinney. And I would say he's coming from the right, but he believes in truth and reconciliation. He's a really interesting character. And so the point is that there is a tremendous potential that wouldn't have been there with Hillary. Because we would have fallen back into this apathy. More people now are willing to have the veils lifted on these things. And I'll send Lori Grace the info on Robert Steele. He's a character and a half. But I think you'll find that he speaks more truth than most people can handle.
Thank you very much.
Oh,
I mean, that's the impression I got from Alex Jones. And
this guy's way better than Alex.
better than Alex Jones, okay. Alex Jones is a little obnoxious.
I don't know. He's
Is it a conservative?
Yeah, you're having too many conversations.
no, he doesn't have a show.
You're
not-
having
not-
too many
it's not
conversations.
I just have a brief statement.
Can you come up?
Not really, just a brief statement.
Well, then we'll have to
Then-
repeat your sentence.
Yeah.
Say again?
Well, repeat the question.
If it's a
We'll
short
repeat.
question, we
Go
can
ahead.
repeat it.
Okay, short statement. Albert Einstein said, to solve a problem, one must go to the level above the problem to solve it. And I would suggest that that ultimate level is spiritual. And that is the domain of religion and spiritual traditions, which have been, in a sense, also co-opted by political correctness and the government funding and all of that stuff.
Okay, so I'll summarize that.
I have a
So
paper here
what
for
you
anyone
are
who'd like a free
saying
copy.
is
I'll
that
give
you
it-
believe that spiritual development is going to be a really important thing, and it's not been paid attention to the way that you like to see and that you believe is important. Okay?
Which is basically the Dalai Lama's position. work on ourselves and we'll solve the world's problems. I don't happen to subscribe to that myself.